So what we're looking at here is focusing how we can support autistic and otherwise neurodivergent students to be successful at the college level in higher education. Because so often people with disabilities, they hear college is not for you. And it is. It is for people with learning differences. And especially with the autistic and neurodivergent population, the academics are intact. And support isn't needed there, or it might be more support on input and output, you might say. So how information is received or how the person expresses that they've mastered material. But where support is really needed is in all the other stuff, executive functioning, socializing on campus, hidden curriculum or unspoken rules of the classroom. What do you do if you feel that an assignment is stupid that a professor has given you? And one thing that I've realized is after talking with many students who are autistic is that if they say an assignment is stupid, there's a high probability that it is stupid. But that said, you still have to do it. And most people just kind of work through that. I don't think I need to do it, but I know the implications. But for the autistic student, we need to work through the process. Well, yeah, you may not need to do the assignment. It's important to validate their view. You may not need to do it. I wouldn't call it stupid, but maybe you don't need to do it. You already know this material. But what happens when you don't complete an assignment? And what are the implications? And what will the professor think? And what happens to your grade? And further on. So it's really thinking things through logically that the student in this case may need support. So what we'll do is we'll look at some things about one, we'll look at some of the differences that we see between high school and college that need to be reckoned with, and also how to prepare students to be ready for college. Because what so often happens is you have a student who's college capable. They can do the work, but are they college ready? And then what can we do at this end as people who are in higher education to make college ready for the students? So it goes both ways. So let's take a look. So what can we do to prepare for the launch of autistic and otherwise neurodivergent students to go to college? And back when I was in college, there was no such program. There was a disabilities office, that's what they called it. Now there's all different types of names that more accurately describe the support that these offices give to students who are in need. And what my parents did is sometimes they'd tell me, take a few days off of high school and go with your sister to the university, your older sister, and hang out with her for a few days. And it was there that, number one, I realized that college was the place to be, as it happens to be for many autistic people who are having difficulty in grade school. And often what I'll tell them is, if you can make it through grade school and get to college, things are going to be much better because the bullies are gone and people accept you more for who you are as opposed to how much you'll like somebody else. So what do we need to do to support students for this launch? What modifications can we find in the university level? And these are some that we see here, some considerations that need to be made, and also various other just college considerations. Whether is residential better or home, and then going to college? Is it transportation? Finding your way around college. You don't need to be autistic to have difficulties figuring out where everything is on campus. Social interaction. What are expected ways that students interact with each other? That you interact with various offices in administration, your professors as well. What about campus groups, various affinity groups, student-recognized organizations that might be interesting? Nutrition. And that tends to be more general, not just with autistic people. You go to the dining commons, it tends to be buffet style. So you can eat whatever you want, as much as you want. And then there's the freshman 15. Managing our schedule, setting up a schedule, choosing your own courses, working within the structure. Autistic people need structure to be successful. University life is very, very structured, but it's up to that person to direct that structure. So as we look at contrasts to what students may be used to, what students' parents may be used to, is that all through college, and by the way, feel free to take as many pictures as you want. The stuff is meant to be shared. So take them, share them with other people, whatever you want to do. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act mandates that students are provided an education, a reasonable education. So if you're my third grade students, part of my job is to always be on the lookout for students who may be having more than expected difficulty in my class. And I find one student right over here who's having more difficulty than expected. And so my job is not to diagnose, because a lot of teachers worry about that too. Oh, am I going to have to diagnose and determine if my students have ADHD or autism or something else? No, you don't have to do that. All you need to do is get familiar with the different categories of disability and know just enough to realize that it's time to talk with a professional in the school, maybe the school psychologist, and possibly refer to that student for special education support. And they do all the heavy lifting of diagnosis and whatnot, determine if the student is in need of special education support. And then you get a report. And from that report, it's up to you to come up with modifications, with curriculum adjustments. Well, at the college level, that goes away, and now it's ADA. And strictly speaking, ADA requires colleges only to provide equal access. And that's about it. Most colleges and universities provide a lot more than that. Various accommodations, adjustments. And sometimes us professors need education, because as professors, we're the kings, we're the dictators of our curriculum. And we can't modify the curriculum. These are the expectations. Where there's a lot of room for modification is in how it's delivered and how we can help the student process this information once it's delivered. And then finally, at the other end, how can the student demonstrate that they've mastered material? Another big difference for students is that the ADA is a self-serve model. It's up to the student to find the appropriate office. It's up to the student to disclose to that office. It's up to the student to advocate for accommodations they need. So as part of preparation for college, involving students in their own educational plan is a great way to do that, because that's where you hear and experience the language of advocacy. Oh, well, my son has difficulty with the lights. They're too bright for him. It's part of a characteristic of autism. So I think, says the parent, we should just shut off the lights, and then my son will be okay. Then the teacher says, well, yeah, I suppose I could do that, but what about all the other students who now aren't able to see? And it goes back and forth, and finally you come up with an adjustment that works for everybody, which might be unscrewing the light above the student's head, sitting them next to the window if there's a window. Hats aren't allowed in school. Well, maybe it's written in the IEP that the student will wear a hat, whatever it might be. So it's that type of negotiation that the student can be exposed to, which will be helpful in school, helpful in every aspect of life. Other comparisons with courses. These are some major differences that we see. One building versus an entire campus. Class sizes can be very different. Also assessment. The tests tend to be bigger as opposed to frequent quizzes. Not all the time. Class periods are longer. What about the student who needs to self-regulate and stand up or walk or leave the room? Is the student who leaves the room in the middle of my class being rude? Or do they need to self-regulate? So these are things that are important to keep in mind. Different types of schooling, or models, I should say. And sometimes a commuter school will be better, or treating a school as a commuter school. At Delphi, where I teach, we have dorms. Many students stay in the dorms and live a traditional college life. Other students need more support, and they may live at home. And maybe they come to take just one class because that's all they can manage at this point, and we slowly ramp it up. So when do you start preparing a student for college? It's never too early. And these are some of the concepts that are important to keep in mind. Self-advocacy being for one, big important one. Where students are advocated for as part of IDEA. Now as part of, with ADA, again, it's a self-support model. Who's driving the bus? Who's your boss? Who gets you up in the morning for that 8 o'clock class? Your mother isn't there anymore. Building a team. What are policies? What documentation is required by the disabilities office? Keeping up with that. Perhaps a recent evaluation by a doctor, no more than a year old. There's a number of offices that require that. So what do you do when the waiting list is 18 months? And I've seen students lose accommodations by inflexible offices who say, well, that documentation was at the end of middle school, and now we need a more recent one. And when you get it, please come back and we'll get you accommodations. Whereas others are more realistic. So that's also important to keep in mind. And speaking of whatever the office is called in the particular college or university, disabilities office, Office of Student Success, Student Access, whatever it might be, what do they need? And a trip to that office is an important part of choosing a college. Are they able to provide for what the student needs? Does the college or university provide? What's the name of the office? The Office of Student what? How do you contact them? And these are issues that most people don't think about. You know, where's the Office of Financial Aid? Oh, it's right over there in the administration building. Okay, I'll go. But fewer people think about finding, in this case, the Office of Diverse Abilities and Access. Do they know what autism is? And I've been in situations where I'd be supporting someone to advocate for their office. And the counselor would say, I really don't know much about autism. So could you please teach me? So I think that's really positive, recognizing what the person knows. And when it comes to accommodations, having knowledge of the characteristics, here I'm talking about autism, but we can generalize to other conditions, other neurodivergencies. This student did a pretty good job in advocating for herself, advocated the need for a separate testing room, advocated for the need of reduced lighting. So she toddles off to this separate room to take an examination, turns off the light and gets ready to go. But the person who was, I guess, monitoring the room that day, for some reason decided that she really needed to have the lights on to take the test. Guess who didn't take the test? So little things like that. Maybe not so little. It's also important to realize that colleges are in the business of education. And sometimes a student may not be ready for university. And they may need to take more time to develop, to get used to it. There are programs that also exist, external programs to the university, such as the college internship program, CIP. They have a number of stations or settings around. They tend to cluster around large universities. There's one in Bloomington, for example. And the model is the student will share housing off campus with other autistic students. And there, they'll learn about self-advocacy, reframing what autism means to them before they even get to the university. So they ramp them up, moving from capable to ready. And then they'll interface with the university Office of Student Support. And the students go through college. Ideally, they go through college just like anybody else. The college experience is valuable on its own right. So there's other programs, such as the CLE, College Living Experience, which does a similar thing. However, the students involved in this organization aren't necessarily expected to graduate or even take regular college courses. So it's sort of like a college within a college in this case. And the courses will be taught, will be specialized courses for these students. Occasionally a student is seen to be capable of doing college work and they'll transfer directly into the college. So it's just a different way of going about it. And the focus there is on all the social aspects of university life, which is also important developmentally. So we're talking about sensory processing. And what is it? That is what your brain and central nervous system spends most of its energy doing. Sorting out, organizing, and making sense of your environment. And right now you're doing that. You're making sense of the sensory input that's coming from me. Here's the screen. There's also a number of other sounds in the room, people moving, people breathing, coughing, ventilation fans, and even the scratching of pens and pencils on the page. Students are writing. But your body's managing it. Central nervous system is managing it. It's no big deal. But for someone with sensory processing disorder, it's difficult to impossible for that person to do that. And that's when we see sensory challenges occurring. And it's neurological in nature. And so what I mean by that is that the sensory organs are functioning just as well as anybody else's. The eyes, the ears, the skin, and so on. But when that information makes its way to the brain and gets processed, that's where the difficulties occur. So if we look at the work of occupational therapists, many tend to focus on what are considered the outer and inner senses. The outer senses, sight, touch, taste, hearing, and smell. You learn those in grade school. That's pretty easy. There's a few inner senses. You may be familiar with the vestibular. That helps you keep your balance. There's the proprioceptive. That tells you where your body parts are in space and how much force to use to accomplish a task. So let's all try something. Everybody touch the back of your chair. All right, you did pretty well. All right, you can let go. How many of you just kind of knew where it was? You could touch it. We take that for granted. We know where our body ends and where the environment begins. And that boundary is often blurred for autistic individuals. And if you don't know where your body is in the environment, then you're going to have a really hard time doing anything else. Proprioception is also good for knowing how much force to use to accomplish a task. How far to move your muscles around. And I see a lot of people with pretty good proprioception as they're taking notes. So do you take for granted how hard you hold the pen? Do you take for granted how far to move it around? How many of you are thinking of forming every letter as you write? Or do you just kind of do it? But for autistic people, that may require a lot of concentration. And even then, it may not be doable. And that also what tells you, that's what helps you drink that bottle of water. You lift it up, you know exactly where it goes. Anybody here drinking a Pepsi or a cup of coffee or tea or anything? Most of the time it ends up in your mouth, doesn't it? Or does it end up going in your ear or pouring it in your eye? And that is what can happen if you have difficulties with proprioception. And then there's interoception, inner bodily states. That's what tells you when you're hungry, it's time to eat. When you're full, it's time to stop. It also tells you when it's time to go to the bathroom. And we see many autistic children and others who are neurodivergent having difficulty with toilet training. And many times the reason is they're just not getting those signals. They don't know when they have to go. They only find out that they have to go after they've gone and had an accident. And even then, due to difficulties in the tactile sense of touch, or maybe sense of smell, they may not even know they've had an accident. And so that's another example of how important these senses are in being able to interpret information and regulation of these senses. So what happens is sometimes things overwhelm one or more of these senses, which I refer to as sensory violations. Lighting. God bless you. Many autistic people perceive fluorescent lights like the ones up here, like you perceive a strobe light. Well, strobe light's fun on Halloween, it's fun at parties, but what if you had to go through the whole day in a room lit with a strobe light? And then there's recessed lighting fixtures. For me, standing under one of these fixtures is probably like looking into a spotlight for most other people. Haircuts. Any of you know autistic people have difficulty with haircuts? Yeah. And why is that? It could be a number of reasons. Could it be the light touch? Could it be the buzzing of the scissors? Could it be the smells? What if you'd have a haircut at home? When you've eliminated a lot of that stuff, but not all of it. For me, I wasn't thrilled with that sensory input, but it wasn't meltdown worthy. What was meltdown worthy was that haircuts hurt. When each strand gets cut, you get a little tug along the way. And for some people, some people feel that tug more than others. For some people, it hurt. But there was no language or knowledge about such things. Many people have food preferences, food sensory intolerances. People who like food that's monotexture. Smoothies, for example. No nuts on ice cream because the sensory differences are just too big. I remember going through a period of time I wouldn't kiss my father, good morning, goodbye, or whatever. And I remember my mother asking me what the problem was because we can't fix it until we figure out the problem. So what was the problem? He had a scratchy beard and his breath stank of coffee. And that was a sensory violation. So these are things that happen that most people don't consider. Ticking, wind up ticking clocks. I don't like those either because they attract all my attention. So if there's such a clock in the room, and sometimes they're battery operated and they tick once per second, and you put it on a wall and the wall amplifies the sound. So the first thing that happens if, for example, I'm staying in a room that has such a clock, just remove the batteries or remove the entire clock. So we have such a wind-up alarm clock, my wife and I. It's a fold-up alarm clock. And she uses it to time her practice sessions. She plays the harp. And then she just leave it out there, and it was ticking away. And I come home, and there it was, and maybe she was, at that time, we were in graduate school. She'd be at school. So I take the thing, fold it up, and put it under a chair cushion. Problem solved. I come home later. Guess who's angrily looking for her clock? Well, now she knows where the clock is if it's missing. So things like that. It can be challenging if a person has sensory challenges. Which leads to this one, self-stimulatory behavior. How many of you engage in repetitive non-functional behavior? And you do. Are you autistic?
Not that I know of.
Okay. So what type of non-repetitive behavior do you engage in?
I mean, like I bounce my foot and I mess with my pen.
Uh-huh.
I find myself taking my pen apart
Mm-hmm.
and putting it back together.
Right. So why do you do that? This question is for anybody who bounces their leg or do these types of things.
I'm bouncing my leg, but it's helping me pay attention to you.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it really is. It's helping you self-regulate. So instead of thinking of these behaviors as pathological or useless or negative, maybe we should refer to it as this. And what you're either doing is upregulating, it keeps you from falling asleep, or downregulating because you're a little bit anxious. So if there's a student or someone who's bouncing their leg, and especially if you have a teacher who says, what are you doing with your leg there? It looks like you have a motor, it's distracting. Stop that. How many of you doodle? Yeah, stop doodling and pay attention. But in reality, the doodling is helping you pay attention. So these self-regulatory behaviors, everybody does them. Autistic people do them more because autistic people tend to be more dysregulated than the typical population. So the regulatory behaviors are going to be bigger and more pronounced.